Alrighty, thank you, Craig, for meeting.
Yeah, good to see you.
Craig's going to answer some of our questions regarding the PYXIS 12K, some other random questions here and there. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what your role is at Blackmagic?
Yeah, so I'm one of the team that's come over to the US to meet everyone at NAB from the European office. I'm one of the senior directors for Blackmagic in Manchester, and we look after Europe, Middle East and Africa for the Blackmagic business, but we interact across all of our regions. Obviously, productions around camera systems might be shooting over in the US, a load of post-production companies in the UK that I work with as well. So we're kind of all over the place.
Bounce all over.
Yeah.
Very cool. So some of these questions are from Facebook groups. Some of them, hopefully not too many, have been asked thus far. We're on the last day of NAB. And I know you guys have been busy.
Yeah.
The first one is the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K, the full frame one.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like a pocket camera. Is that the last time we'll maybe see a camera in that form factor? So just to preface, some of these things might be speculative. Yeah. There may not be answers, but.
Yeah, look, I think it's difficult to predict in terms of giving you a confident yes or no. The truth of it is, if there's always a need and a demand for that kind of handheld, let's call it like a hybrid style camera system, then we're always going to want to service that. What we always look to give in any camera system that we develop is customers have the choice. Particularly say with the Cinema Camera 6K, you're absolutely right. It was developed from the Pocket camera series, and it's kind of a cousin to that. So it's a handheld, lightweight system, and PYXIS followed. So they share a sensor, and if you put PYXIS 6K that we announced last year next to the Cinema Camera 6K, it's the same sensor. You can achieve the same fantastic images. You choose. Do you need a cube-based camera that you're going to rig out and build for your own use? Or do you want a handheld system, you put a lens on and away you go? If there's a demand from customers, we'll always work to sort of support that as best we can.
Perfect. Thank you. Will the pre-record functionality become available for the 6K full frame and the PYXIS 12K models? The firmware 9.6, I believe that came out or was announced. Okay.
Yeah, potentially. We've announced it to support PYXIS 6K and the Ursa Broadcast G2. Mm-hmm. Those are two camera technologies that we've been working on with the engineering team to bring that in. We know that pre-record's been a request from customers for quite a while, and something we always wanted to do. It will depend on the hardware of the product and the capability of the particular camera, so there will be a cutoff. Mm-hmm. Some of the cameras that already exist might be too old for us to bring that in, but going forward it'd be something that I know the engineering team will look at. If it suits the functions and feature of the camera and the hardware is capable of doing it, I certainly think we'll be looking to add it to cameras as well.
Okay, so with the PYXIS 12K, just changing the resolution impact the power consumption. So if I jump from 12K to 8K to 4K, is the power consumption going to be consistent on the camera?
No, you shouldn't see a change. So let's say if you're working in 12K or you're worried about battery consumption at 12K, you won't see a significant difference if you shot in 4K.
Okay.
So don't let that be a concern. Don't let that be really a consideration. The camera will work between, I believe, 60 to 80 watts, depending on configuration or if you've got accessories connected over USB. But in terms of how the way the sensor's working and the resolutions, there'll be no change between those formats and pretty much how the batteries are working.
Okay, and just a little follow-up with that, I think I've seen you answer this before. The power draw from the EVF and the power draw from the PYXIS monitor are pretty equal.
Yeah,
is that correct?
7 to 8 watts.
Okay.
In that sort of range. So they're very lightweight on the camera. But do consider that. You know, when you build out a camera rig and you know what your batteries are, we're using BPU, so they're slightly higher capacity than, say, some of the older camera systems. But just be aware of them. You can only use one as well. We only have the one USB port on here. We have announced the two new accessories for PYXIS. So we have a Pro Handle and a Pro Grip. You can use those together because we have a loop through on the actual unit as well. So you can put those together as a handheld system. If you're using the Cine system, which is the EVF or the PYXIS monitor, you can only use one or the other.
Okay.
So there's some work to be done there in terms of if you're looking at PYXIS now, you're going to rig it out. Just look at the accessories you're adding in and then what that drain will be on the batteries as you attach them.
Perfect.
But yeah, resolution doesn't affect that.
Perfect. Does changing the frame rates affect sensor readout speeds?
To some degree, yes, sometimes. If you're going through the higher frame rate systems, some of the higher speed readouts are going to actually be related to resolution.
Okay.
So as you change frame rate and you're going up, say, 112 frames a second, you're at 4K or 8K DCI, then you will have a different readout speed. If you're shooting 12K open gate, you're going to have a limitation up to 40 frames a second. And it's also a slower readout because we're doing a lot more work across that sensor So there's a bit of a balance between them. If you want to know what the actual speed readouts are, we published all of those for PYXIS on the forum. So if you want to know, I want to shoot in 8K or 4K, if you want to know what the resolutions are, you'll see what the variances are on readout speeds against the frame rates.
Yeah. And even being just double, because roughly they're double what they are in the Cine 12K, which is still, I mean the Cine 12K is fast.
Yeah, it is.
And so this is definitely manageable.
The example
Definitely doable.
I've been using is 2.4 to 1 at 8K.
Yeah.
In a camera this size, first we go, wow, you could do that. If we're shooting in that format, you're looking around 10 milliseconds as a readout, which is really, really usable.
Yes.
It would be under 5 milliseconds on the Ursa Cine 12K, because that's
essentially global shutter.
Yeah, it's so instantaneous. But that's a different camera system. The bigger brother, the Ursa Cine 12K system, is a much faster camera hardware. By shrinking down to the PYXIS, obviously we're working on different internal hardware systems. So one of the trade-offs is we can do those resolutions, we can work at those formats. It's just slightly slower readout on the sensor itself.
Makes sense. And this is a bit about low light performance, comparing the 6K and the 12K. And we're gonna say the Ursa Cine 12K, since this isn't out yet.
Okay, right.
We're gonna ask in that perspective. So how does the low light performance of the PYXIS 6K compare to the Ursa Cine 12K LF / PYXIS 12K? The PYXIS 6K has dual gain ISO, and the 12K has 16 stops of dynamic range. So how would you compare those low light?
It's a bit apples and oranges, because they're two different sensor technologies. The original full frame 6K sensor with the dual ISO is similar to a dual ISO system we've had in the pocket cameras for a number of years, with that dual readout 400-3200 capability. The idea of that dual ISO system is you can place your dynamic range between those two ISO settings so that you can accommodate where your shadows sit and what your fall off might be. So if you're working in low light environments, you can control where the noise floor is, make sure that you don't get any of that nastiness that you can find in shadows. When you move across to the 12K sensor, we have 16 stops of dynamic range compared to the lower 13 stops in the dual ISO system, and it is a different program. So it's an RGB system. We're reading sample color at 1:1:1 across RGB rather than a Bayer-based system, which is 2 channels of green, 1 of blue, 1 of red. So there's some differences in the way that the actual sensor's behaving and how chromatic noise might appear. And then also in the 12K system, we have W pixels. So these are white or wideband. We're using a lot more of the sensor to acquire luminance sampling. So that's how we're achieving 16 stops. That's why we know the noise floor and actual fall off looks fantastic. So you'll see a difference. It's hard to compare and say. I'm sure somebody out there might do a shootout and test them.
Yeah.
But we'd be confident. You get great response on the 6K because of the dual ISO, but the 16 stops of the 12K sensor and maybe some additional recovery and resolve beyond that is going to it's a whole new technology.
Perfect. And with that, with those extra white pixels, it could maybe be assumed that the grayscale, like if you're shooting black and white, there'd probably be more information there. Has anyone tested that yet? Like,
It's interesting.
With how that visually looks compared to a typical RGB sensor?
Not that I've seen.
Okay.
But yeah, look,
Somebody's got homework.
yeah, potentially. But no, you're right. In a Bayer system, your luminance information is calculated from your green channel and the subtractive maths, and we know Bayer pattern systems create fantastic images. Of course we do. Our RGBW system is different in a sense of by using that wideband pixels, the white pixels, we get broad luminance spectrum from deep shadows to bright highlights, and that can be combined then with the RGB data sampling, and we can then use those to create stunning images. If you're going to shoot and you want to deliver black and white, it's actually really important to have really well balanced color. So colorists that are better than me will explain to you that you maybe want to balance out your reds and use your reds to help saturate and bring some definition to your shadows in black and white. So we can do a lot more of that work with the RGB sensor than say with the older sensors that are Bayer based or dual ISO based in those cameras.
With the RGBW, perfect. That's very interesting. I love the sensor. I guess with that, Shane Hurlbert, excuse me, forgive me. Yeah, thank you. We love you, Shane. With Filmmakers Academy, did a great video with Tor.
Yep. So,
with Dave Cole, colorist.
Yep.
And they walked through the Ursa Cine 12K. Did some test shots and then went in and graded it and pushed it to its limits. Kind of took it apart. And what they liked was about 800 ISO, 1600 ISO. Is that what you expect most people to probably be using that camera? It is not a no light camera.
No.
I kind of want people to understand that. It's not an FX3, but it has 16 stops of dynamic range.
Yeah. This is an area that's always a bit contentious. I think it's very subjective as well, because
Yes.
what you might think is low light, I mean, go, well, we need to put a bit more light into. No light camera systems are going to, high super ISO ranges, and probably got in-camera noise reductions to help process that out. At worst, they can start to look a bit smudgy. You're throwing away image detail, you're losing clarity and vibrance because you want to shoot maybe on the gun or in a darkened environment. That might be a demand of a documentary filmmaker or somebody that's covering events or anything like that. The need should always dictate what the camera is, right? It shouldn't be that the camera tells you what work you could do. So if that's the camera systems you need, there's technologies that can support that. Our camera systems are different. The 12K sensor is built for digital filmmakers, is built for corporate, commercial, music, some documentary use. My experience working with DOPs on multiple film sets, and this as a generalism, is they'll stick the camera at native ISO, so in this case 800, and they will work around that. The last thing they'll want to do is alter the ISO in the camera. It's a choice. That will change if you go up, if you go down. But they'll work around that and light and allow the camera to work where it's most comfortable, where they know the response is most accurate, and then set their exposure value based on lighting or environment around it, or even the lensing to choose the shot. So everyone will know from a cinematography point of view, it's a bit of a balance. What the camera can achieve, what the lens allows you, and how you light your scenes.
Perfect. And so that is 800 ISO. You said?
Native.
Okay, perfect. The PYXIS 6K has a dual ISO chipset. One could maybe presume that this will be ported to the 12K LF, that dual ISO chipset.
No, it's a different architecture.
Okay.
So we are talking about the physical construction of the sensors themselves. So dual ISO system is one particular technology. Bayer-based with a dual ISO readout, and how that's been constructed is the actual sensor itself. And then the 12K sensor, RGB-based CFA, and it doesn't have a dual ISO function. It's not in the architecture of the sensor itself, so it isn't something we would change.
The autofocus system that's now with 9.5, firmware 9.5, and the Cinema Camera 6K full frame, it has a combination I've seen in the menu system. It has phase detect autofocus or contrast based. Does that use, with that camera, a combination of those two? Some Sony Alpha series use a combination of phase detect and contrast based. Does it use that, or is it specifically or exclusively phase detect or contrast based?
It's a mix of technologies within it, depending on what the choice is on the autofocus. So we've got phase detect pixels across the sensor, across the width of the sensor in its entirety. So we can use those for the face detection elements of it. There's some edge detection processing in there as well. But what's actually key for us is we have an AI layer. So we have an object tracking, and you'll see this in Grant's presentation that he did announcing at the show. We use object tracking as well. So we've got multiple functions inside of the autofocus to play around with, and ensure that whatever you're choosing inside of that new setup is as sharp as possible and tracks accurately and as fast as possible in frame.
With that, if I'm remembering correctly, we've been running around NAB, so my mind's kind of fogged. I think I recall Grant saying with the face detection, something about up to 3 faces. Do you mind?
Yeah, so the technology will allow us, and you'll see it in the overlay. If you've got multiple people in frame, it will recognize multiple faces in frame, and it'll create an overlay grid, and it will also number the individuals.
Okay.
So you can tap and choose which individual you want to track. Yeah.
So if there's 4 or 5 people, it'll choose maybe the closest 3, or
I'm not sure. I think it chooses the closest by default, and then
and
then you can choose which you want.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you'll see on the overlay as well, there's a color system which says it's either tracked and locked, or it's seeking, or it's lost the track.
Which is great.
Yeah.
It's lovely. Thank you. An individual on Facebook says that the 6K full frame sensor is responsible for autofocus tracking, and EF has single autofocus. He asks, on the 6K full frame, autofocus works with EF glass and the Sigma adapter. So will the EF bodies be reviving autofocus firmware?
Currently, no. We're using L mount. So the actual beta that you can download today is for the L mount. We're part of the L mount Alliance, so that's a protocol and a lens system that we know that we can work with from a data set point of view. We could look maybe in the future. There's no time frame for that. Obviously, we've got a lot of legacy EF users out there that we probably want to take that onto it. That's a slightly different standard. It's a different format from Canon. So you'll see in the autofocus right now that it's L mount specific, and then maybe some future news about EF or what we can do with that. But right now it's just for the L mount.
Perfect. And I guess just to close out, you know, as we've said, this is the last day of NAB 2025.
Yeah.
You've heard from a lot of people. You've had a lot of people back here in this press area. What have you? I know you've been bouncing around out there.
Right.
What have you, in general, heard? Feedback-wise, or praise, criticism regarding the camera systems that Blackmagic offers?
I think people were surprised by this.
Okay.
This is a pretty phenomenal technical development for us. You know, going back last year when we were here at the show, we announced the PYXIS 6K. So that was an answer to customers that had asked of us for a while, which was when we were going to do a cube-based camera. So we did, and we were talking at the time about now you have the choice. You could use the Cinema Camera 6K, or you could use the PYXIS. We built what we believe to be probably the most riggable and customizable camera system. It's super lightweight. And then we also announced the Cinema 12K, and the technical development will come with the digital 65 system. So we've got both those cameras here at the show now, and they're very sort of high level statement pieces for us. And that 12K sensor being shown last year was years ahead of where we'd been with our cameras previously. When we'd spoken about the pandemic had come along, we felt like we'd slowed down with our camera development because the world had slowed down, and we were now fully gunning to build the best camera we thought was possible with the Ursa Cine platform. To take that sensor, the 12K Cine sensor that we have, and put it in PYXIS is just another step in the technical capability we've done with it. What's really exciting for us is I've seen the quality of the 12K and now the 17K 65mm, and they're stunning. Photography has been done by some much better filmmakers than me. It's very exciting to see what people are going to do with this camera system, with that sensor, and combining those two together. That's probably been the highlight of the show, and certainly lots of people want to see this camera and are interested in what's coming with it.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you, Craig.
Awesome.
For your
Great
time.
to meet you. Thank you.
We appreciate it a lot. You guys have done great work.
Right.